cash these people out. You would sort of assume founders and the people who are getting the stock in the very first days of a company are going to stick around. And if you've promised them special rights if they ever sell their stock, there's also a concern of, well, if they leave early, what will you have to do to meet your obligations that you've promised them? And that's something to keep in mind with equity in general, is whether it's a straight stock grant or it's a phantom stock unit, is to keep in mind, yes, what you're giving them may not have a cash dollar worth now, but when you have to keep in mind that obviously has to be paid out at some point. And it's important to keep that in mind when you're deciding how much to give out. And this sort of goes to the dilution effect. If you're careful with how much you're giving out, in the sense that you have to pay, this has to be paid, especially if there's dividends or first rights or rights to force the company to buy it back, you have to keep that in mind when you go through and decide how much to give or whether to give it at all. On the flip side, if you give rights that are extremely favorable to employees, sometimes that will encourage them to leave. They've gotten what they can get out of the company or given what they think they can give, and they have all these favorable rights that they want to use before who knows what happens to them. They know as well as anyone else, investors may not like it, and they may go away, and so why not take advantage while you still can? And so that's sort of a two-edged sword there. It's a risk for the employees and for the company. Typical angel investors, do you want to take this one?
Angel investors are getting lots of publicity right now, and it's because they're getting more creative. It used to be that angel investors were usually individual investors. They were usually people who were independently wealthy, who were interested in a particular company, and they put money in. Now what's happening is they are banding together in groups of angel investors. So you're hearing a lot more about them, and they're starting to look sort of more like venture capitalist or PE groups. But there's a lot of money out there. They usually are accredited. The SEC has some standards for how much individual net worth someone needs to have to be an accredited investor. Most of these people are. Most of them are technically savvy, and they're very interested in they have entrepreneurs, and they themselves usually have some type of an entrepreneurial background. A little bit before we talked about what some of these investor groups are looking for when they come in, as far as dilution. They generally don't like seeing a whole lot of founder stock with a lot of preferential rights. But what they usually do is set up their own preferential rights. I mean, usually that's capital that's very much needed at that stage in an entity's existence. And usually the founders are willing to let some of these investors come in and make demands. But the demands really are very much into self-protection for the investors, which is why they frequently will come in and say that they want new classes of stock that will benefit them, usually classes that have not previously been issued, that have rights that they receive. But there's something that they get them. And they also, though, are usually very interested in making sure that the top people who they think are the key employees, the key officers,